I think we're live. We'll see if we're live. Alright. I heard a noise, which I'm assuming this is a notification on your phone that says we went live.
It is.
Alright, so now we're back from technical difficulties and we're able to make fun of everyone and everything.
Right. Just so you know, guys, I'm going to mute the volume from this because I'm finishing up a piece which I hope Matt will be kind enough to read.
Why don't you read it?
Because I'm narcissistic and I want to hear somebody else read it.
I see. Okay, so the whole point of this is... okay. Got it.
One moment.
You see, if we go to Mr. Beer's Quora profile, he quite clearly
I can't
states...
hear you now, Matt. You could probably cuss me out if you wanted.
Oh, you're muting me. Alright, so Mr. Beers is currently muted his stuff. Okay, so that he can't hear me talk so that he's able to continue and do his typey thingy. In the meantime, I'm going to show you one of the self-deprecation tactics that Mr. Beers uses. See, if you go to his profile, not only does he do self-deprecation, but does sarcasm. I mean, he does the whole introduction thing in a great way. He says, Caleb Beers, some guy on the internet. He doesn't even have it capitalized first off. I'm Caleb. Nice to meet you. Do not take anything I write seriously. I'm just a guy with a boring job who moonlights as an internet crackpot. I have no college degree. Also, those books behind me in the video are just full of blank pages. I only put them there to make me look smart. I'm actually full of crap and have no idea what I'm talking about. My answers are just a bunch of long words and pontification meant to impress you so I can get some validation. Anything insightful I say was stolen. Promise. Then he has all of his social media contact information. Alright. So there's that. Alright, well. So. I'm going to be very interested to see in seeing what Mr. Beers has in store for us. In the meantime, we can just sit here and stare at him and watch him type. Or not. So anyhow, we were talking yesterday about the importance of having a liberal arts education. And so, I did as promised, and I began putting together some stuff from the Iliad. Right now I'm giving a bit of historical context, and I should be ready to talk on the subject either tomorrow or at the beginning of next week. It kind of makes sense to start on Monday, so we'll probably begin then. In the meantime, I can talk with Mr. Beers today, and perhaps with either Mr. Beers or Mr. Stutz on Sunday, and then we can get that thing started. But in the meantime, there are some interesting developments, right? And I'm going to preface all this by saying that I don't agree with Alex Jones. I think that he is, in many aspects, wrong. I just think that it's interesting that he has been censored. Essentially, a blanket censorship has occurred across many social media platforms, which I think is the whole simultaneous aspect of that. It's interesting. It's interesting that they would choose to get rid of him all at once at some quite random time, all in a single day. I suppose that would be a sign of disapproval, although I'm starting to have other theories. I'm starting to think that Perhaps those on the left, and by left, of course, I mean the U.S. definition of left, those on the left are actually trying to sabotage the left. I'm actually thinking that they could conceivably be trying to ruin things as opposed to make things better for themselves. Now, the reason my theory goes like that is because since when have you known people to go out and do things that they don't set out to do? Like actually intelligent people. I mean, maybe I'm giving them too much credit, but I'm going to guess that they either have realized the error of their ways, or they've been setting this up the entire time. That they recognize the cyclical nature of history, and they just want to go and provide fuel for the fire on the right. They want to be able to fuel the right-wing agenda. And by the right wing, I don't mean necessarily only the extremists on the right wing. I mean everyone left of, or everyone right of, say, Marx. Well, maybe that's a little different, but everyone right of center. Because ultimately, yeah, Alex Jones is, he's misinformed in many aspects. Either that, or he's decided that he's just going to propagate these ill-conceived ideas for his own profit, whatever his motivations may be. But we can all decide whether or not we want to go and see him, and then obviously that just causes him to gain in notoriety, right? People, they're realizing that they can't just shut him off quietly, and they should have known. So I'm going to assume that they did know that that would take place, which means that they are actually on our side. They are actually trying to make us stronger, which means we have many secret allies on the left. Now, maybe I could be completely full of horse crap here. Maybe they actually aren't on our side. Maybe they are just causing trouble, or maybe they're looking to increase social tension. You know, maybe they've found a way of benefiting from increased social tension, or maybe, I don't know, maybe they're having short positions in many markets. I don't know. But either way, I think the whole banning of Alex Jones thing and the whole getting onto people's backs on the social media is pretty laughable, as long as we respond appropriately. And Mr. Beers has responded appropriately in that Mr. Beers went and shared all of his information. How to see Alex Jones videos and so on. How to still watch Alex Jones. How to interact with his content, etc. And he did that in spite of disagreeing with Mr. Jones. So the whole idea is that there are certain things that we hold dear. There are certain things that we hold important, and free speech is one of them. That no one should be able to tell us who or what to say, who to say it to, or what not to say and who not to say it to. Compelled speech or lack thereof, no matter who is doing the speaking, is incredibly vile. It assumes that the listener can't come to his own conclusions on the matter. It assumes that the listener needs to be having everything censored according to the opinion, according to the will of some government bureaucrat somewhere. And, well, freedom of speech and freedom of religious expression at least are constitutionally guaranteed rights in the United States. It's interesting if you go and you look at other countries' constitutions. Many of them have many more rights than we do in the United States. And it's interesting because I've discovered that the more rights we have, it's a case more of the big print giveth and the fine print taketh away. So if you start with, for instance, life, liberty, and property, or life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, those are broad. Those are three very big umbrellas that basically say, okay, we don't have the right to take away other people's lives. We don't have the right to take away other people's liberties, and we don't have the right to take away other people's pursuit of happiness or property or the product of their labor, and so on. That's partially having to do with life and liberty. In fact, if we want to go and digress just a little bit on that particular tangent, taking away one's life is taking away future. And if you take away my life, I have no future here. If you take away my liberty, I have no present here. And if you take away my property, everything that I worked for in the past, or at least some percentage of it, goes away. So basically, the life, liberty, and property goes through all time and basically says that I have the right to me and my stuff, and you have the right to you and your stuff, and nobody else can go and take that away. And going from that particular perspective, then the Bill of Rights kind of makes sense to some extent. Now, granted, I would say that a lot of it shouldn't be necessary. Like the First Amendment, freedom of speech, freedom of religious affiliation, that kind of a thing, shouldn't need it if you actually understand these three basic principles. The right to bear arms, the Second Amendment, and so on. You can't rely on somebody else to 100% of the time protect that which is yours, and so you should have the right to defend what is yours. So hence the Second Amendment. So when people go and they start adding all these different rights, the more rights that are added, the more people can go and say, well, is my getting this right going to infringe upon your getting some other right? And still you can go and say, okay, someone's right to life might infringe on someone else's right to liberty, and so on. And I would actually tend to say that life supersedes liberty, supersedes property. In that order, life is more important than liberty, is more important than property. Though other people could potentially take issue at that, right? Live free or die, as the New Hampshire motto states. Live free or die. Or give me liberty or give me death. But as a rule of thumb, I would say that if unless you have the consent of another person, I'm going to go and say that if it's the choice of someone else's life or my liberty,
can you hear me?
I'm going to pick someone else's life. And if it's the choice of someone else's liberty or my property, I'm going to pick the other person's liberty.
One moment.
And so on. And I would certainly hope that the other person would pick my life over his liberty, or my liberty over his property. I can't guarantee that would be the case, but I would say that life, liberty, and property generally go in general order, with few exceptions of decreasing importance. Now, one could conceivably say that one uses one's liberty to give up one's liberty for a time. Like, let's say, well, I mean, I suppose people would
Matt,
freely fight
can you hear me at
for
all?
their country in a defense kind of a way, and would give up their liberty to work for
Yes, I can see
someone
my
else.
voice
In other
being
words, to
transmitted. You
submit
must have me
themselves
on
to the
mute.
authority of someone else's generalship, who happens to have a plan and an idea. But that's also a consensual thing. There's no conscription involved. So you still don't wind up having to play the same kind of juggling game as you do if you're balancing a bill of rights of 50 different things where you're wondering what supersedes the other, and then whoever can make a good case can essentially stomp on the rights of other people in order to maintain their own. And it appears that Mr. Beers has finished with his latest Quora piece, so we can take a look at that. Let's see, what is it? How would you describe the writing tone of a millennial? Oh boy, this is going to be fun. I can't wait to hear him read his piece. In the meantime, we'll link it to you in the description. Oh, Steven is here. The madman typing away on the right is Mr. Caleb Beers. That is what he was typing away on the right, the link there. And we are making fun of everyone, etc., which basically means everyone, including ourselves, can conceivably be subject to being made fun of. So if you guys want to make fun of us, go right ahead. Sometimes we might wind up diverging and talking about such subjects as philosophy, but whatever.
Damn it.
And hello, Jacob. Good to see you too. Hello, Jacob. Hello, Steven. There we go. Welcome to the stream. I am really going to have to get a second moderator at some point so that I can actually read the chat and have other things going on at the same time. Now, there we go.
I'm not muted. Okay.
I can't hear you, Caleb, if you're trying to be heard. All right, Mr. Beers is in the process of trying to get his microphone working. Mr. Beers, can you hear me? Not if you can. Crap. Well, on that note, he says he wants to read his own piece, the thing that he was furtively typing and so on. So I won't take away his
Fuck, just there.
There we go.
An outlaw.
Wait a minute.
Okay,
Let's
there
see
we go.
if that
Can you
improves
hear
the
me now?
situation. Nope. Doesn't.
You still cannot hear me.
Anyhow, in the meantime, I've been kind of waiting to have a piece from Caleb ready to go, so I'm not sitting on too much other material, but I can go and talk about whatever you want to talk about. You can talk about yes, I cannot hear you, Caleb, but Discord says it's transmitting your voice.
Yes.
That is very, very odd. Let me change my Discord settings then and see if that improves things. Caleb, would you be able to... Wait a minute. I don't know if I'm hearing you. Would you say something, please? I can hear you now. Let me check and see if the stream can hear you. Will you please say something else? Great. Great. I can hear you, and they can't. So, give me just one other moment. Alright, let's do that. Could you please say something now? I don't think so. No. That's Well, that sucks. I'll try that, but alright.
How about now?
Ha, I think it worked. Why in the world does it keep on undoing that? Oh well, you had a piece, and it had to do with millennial writing style.
How about now? Okay, yes, I am audible on stream through my phone. I had a piece I wanted to read because I just wrote it and I'm a big enough narcissist that I wanted to read it.
I thought you were a big enough narcissist to want to have someone else read it and then listen while the other person was reading, but if you hadn't changed your mind, then go ahead and read.
Well, yeah, I changed my mind. I love the sound of my own voice.
I see. Well, just remember that this guy is... Just humor him.
Is Caleb interesting? No, I'm not interesting at all. If you want something interesting, you need to get the fuck out because I am the most boring person on the planet.
If you want something interesting, then watch Nicki Minaj music videos.
Yeah, go watch Nicki Minaj shake her ass and talk about anacondas. There you go. Anyway, this was in response to a question on Quora.com entitled, "How would you describe the writing tone of a millennial?" And this was my answer to it. Millennials do not, as a whole, have a distinctive voice in writing. It's doubtful whether different generations ever do, although one could plausibly make the argument that different centuries have their own voices in writing. That being said, there's a particular writing style that, while not universal, is certainly common among millennials, not only in popular writing but also on social media, and it has, regrettably, influenced both. I call it the hipster drone. The hipster drone is a pastiche of 20th century postmodern writing. think Bukowski or Burroughs, with faux grit that is very obviously not backed by lived experience. There are certain young people who present as bohemian street urchins, making their way in the rundown world of urban America. Such people would probably feel better about themselves if their ostensibly precarious lives were authentic and not lived against the backdrop of a robust middle-class support network. Not everyone who writes in the hipster drone is this way, but there is probably a correlation. The hipster drone is familiar from soy boy-infested online news popular among millennials. Vox, Vice, all that garbage. The tone is, generally, moralizing, with generous use of vulgarity even when written semi-formally. The vulgarity is a good example of why it's the hipster drone. The attempted shock value of throwing fuck and shit into a piece, written in an otherwise journalistic tone, loses the power of jarring contrast after a few minutes, and the emotion it's meant to convey is thoroughly unconvincing. It would sound appropriate coming from the mouth of a sickly liberal arts student, with gauged ears and a high nasal voice, complete with a faint lisp and an iPhone. The content is moralizing nonsense, and the tone reflects this. Overused come across as a gesture meant to convey the unity of some tool who thinks masculinity is
Mr.
toxic.
Beers, yours or my connection may have gone.
Can you hear me?
I can't hear you now. No.
Yeah, it still says it's transmitting my... Can you hear me now?
Can't hear you.
You still can't hear me. 1 second. How about now? Can you hear me?
Still can't hear you.
Still can't?
Why in the world do we wind up getting...
How about now? You can't hear me.
I can now.
You can?
Yeah, I'll see if the stream can.
Alright.
Alright, so please do
Accordingly,
continue.
analytic pieces...
The content is typically...
The content is typically moralizing nonsense, and the tone reflects this. Overused curse words come across as a hollow gesture meant to convey the anemic masculinity of some tool who thinks masculinity is toxic. Accordingly, analytic pieces written in the hipster drone consist of regurgitated left-wing talking points wrapped up in some half-digested continental philosophy gotten third-hand from a course in women's studies, artless but delivered with the kind of fervor that can only be found in a useful idiot. Not all millennials write in the hipster drone, of course. Some of them write in a quasi-academic style with occasional poetic flourishes, either because they're pretentious or because they know their audience. One gets the impression that such writing comes from a clinical and detached standpoint, and that the self-conscious writerly flourishes are deliberately calculated to make the author's ideas more palatable. It's a philosopher's dead earnest, spiced with wry digressions and an irony that lives more in tone than in content. For the life of me, I can't remember the last example I saw of this.
Oh, boy. You're terrible.
I know.
Oh, Mr. Beers, you are terrible. This is altogether way too fun. What's a hipster drone? So droning. I'm assuming it's, well, like let's say when you're playing the bagpipes. When you're playing the bagpipes, and you're squeezing the air out of the thing.
What's a hipster drone? I just described it.
Hey, Steven. I'm just going back to the chat. Lol, I can't hear you. No, I can't. I don't know if you're being serious right now or if you're being facetious, but I really would appreciate if we would behave in a respectful way in the chat. A hipster drone, I'm assuming he means like the drone of the bagpipes.
The writing style I just described? I said I call it the hipster drone.
Mm. Have I read any left-wing news or opinion site oriented toward young people? There's all sorts of them, and occasionally I'll go and I'll read their stuff, but it seems to all be pretty much regurgitated crap. Like, have you watched Vice? Have you watched Vice? There are all these pieces that come across as having some sort of substance, and really all they are is people being edgy and trying to make it come across as yeah, people trying to make it come across as something deep or somehow containing an awful lot of information, or somehow containing a lot of tone or a lot of something. I don't even know. But it's interesting because you can read a piece or two, and then are we political? No, I mean, we don't go out of our way to be. We go out of our way to be
We are
more
occasionally
talking about the
political.
philosophical underpinnings of everything, and then figuring out how the world works, how to function within it, and basically being here acting like ourselves. And, well, if you go and you take a look at some of our older stuff, on my channel, for example, we have a lot of it. You can actually see Caleb's channel in the description as well, um, under Caleb Beer's YouTube channel. You can see kind of the stuff that we do, and it's kind of all over the board, because we talk about things in general terms, and then because so many different things are interconnected with each other. Well, good. Well, that's
Yeah, it's probably a good
in that case,
thing. Don't read them.
You've been able to avoid a good amount of crap, Mr. Montoya. Well, I don't. Mr. Thorbeer's good question. Do I think the university students are getting more pseudo-intellectual to sound more advanced than they really are and get better grades? No, because I don't think that you need to sound pseudo-intellectual in order to get good grades. Whiny works just as well as intellectual in terms of tone. I'm thinking that people are trying to sound pseudo-intellectual so that they can go and think more highly of themselves. If you don't know anything and you don't understand anything, and yet you can come across as well put together, that's a whole lot better for you, or at least for your own self-image, than if you admit that you don't know anything and spend the time actually putting yourself together so that what you come out doesn't, or what you have coming out of your mouth or coming out of the tip of your pen or out of your computer isn't a load of crap. But people tend to gravitate, or at least given two pieces, somebody completely unbiased will probably go and find the truthful thing to be more resonant with what they are experiencing in life, and will be drawn to it in some way, whereas that eventually people realize when they're getting smoke blown up their butts. But no, I wouldn't say that we're political per se, although politics definitely comes up in conversation, although especially when Caleb's involved, it comes up in a more theoretical way. It comes up more in the way of where we're talking about different forms of government, different ways of working in the world. Mr. Beers, do you have something to add?
Is it like when you use a bunch of euphemistic language,
I can't hear you
extensions of
again.
words to... Okay.
Alright, so they can hear you, but I can't. Okay, that's fine. Oh, I can see, because I can see the indicator. I suppose I'll just...
Oh, well, no. Using
Well, dear viewers, I'm having trouble with my Discord client. Like, now I can't see or hear Mr. Beers, and I'm probably going to wind up having to quit and restart it. Ever since they went and changed a bit about the way the sound was transmitted through the servers, I've been having all sorts of trouble with it, and I suppose that it might have something also to do with the fact that I'm using a more unusual platform, so we'll see how that all winds up working out. Alright, let's see. Mr. Beers, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
All right,
Can you
I
hear
can't
me?
hear you.
You can't?
Even though I restarted my client, I can't hear you.
Okay.
But, Alright, I can. Now it's time to see if they can. Would you please say that again? Well, whatever, just please do continue talking. I'm gonna have to go and... Alright. There we go. Alright, let's see if they can hear you now. Doesn't seem like it. What in the world is going on here? This has never happened before. Doesn't seem like it. There we are. So now I have to go and get like a picture of you. This has never happened before. I need to get a picture of Mr. Beers. Doesn't seem like it. There we are. So now I have to go and get like a picture of you. Wow, and the stream delay is almost nothing. And now we have a picture of you. Alright, so what did I miss?
I'm not sure. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Well, they can't hear me on stream, so I'm just going to bow out of this stream.
They can't?
I don't think so.
Okay, let's try that and see if that works, because it's now showing, or at least it's showing that it should, the volume indicator showing that you're talking. How about now?
Can you hear me now? They say they can hear me now, Jacob Blank says.
Great. This is... Alright, so we're going to have to go and figure out something else. Because Discord is no longer... Discord, I think, is no longer going to work for our purposes.
I will back out of this stream then.
No, I mean, it is working now, but if it fails again, then we'll just figure something out for next time. So, well, perhaps we can go and... Sure, go ahead.
Go ahead and do it.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Stephen Montoya, I want to know if I have your attention. Can you hear me? Mr. Stephen Montoya.
I think it'll probably be 20 seconds or so.
Okay, just let me know when you can hear me, Stephen. I need you to type to let me know that you're paying attention. I have a very special message. A very special message for you, Stephen.
But I'm going to make one suggestion, and it actually has to do with a piece that I saw about the use of snark and so on.
Yes?
There's a very different way. Uh, at least I subscribe to there being a different way of dealing with different kinds of people. Like if someone is in the ring, so to speak. Let's say somebody has gone and is in a position of authority, or is put themselves into a particular position where they can go and say, this is the way things are. You know, pulling strings and playing around and doing all those sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the kinds of people that, because they have gone and put themselves in the ring and declared themselves as participants, you can feel free to knock out. Then there are other people that may just need some help in learning how to put their own gloves up and defend against other things. Like, I would say that perhaps not being completely inculcated with a particular worldview might necessitate a different tack, so please do keep that in mind whenever you say whatever it is you're going to say.
Understood.
But please go right ahead and say what it is you're going to say.
Go right ahead and say it?
Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Stephen Montoya. I remember when I was very young, and the adults would use a word. I had an older sister who was very headstrong, but not too bright. Not very bright at all. A bit dense. Very dense. And whenever someone, even an adult, told her something she didn't know, she'd say, I knew that. You know, she thought, for example, that when her father, who was also my father, because she was my sister, you see, talked about the bills or the budget, that he was trying to sound like he was smarter than she was. And she was like 8 years old saying this stuff. It was very silly. And I think that if one is in that position, it would behoove one to try and learn something, maybe crack a book. Not like, I don't mean like go surf the web and look up porn. I mean like actually, fucking read something. And when you get to the point, if you're one of these people where you don't have to feel threatened because you heard a long word, you'll know that you will have improved your character.
So in the case of, say, hipster drone, I think that he means, so a drone is, in a musical sense, a note or a combination of notes that just goes
right. Right,
in the middle of something
buzzing.
and just never stops. So if hipsters are droning, well, what would that mean? It means just constantly doing what hipsters do over and over and over again, completely unceasing. So needing to have something coming out of the mouth hole all the time. And because it is not substantive, it's not, there's no melody, there's no harmony, it's just a drone. That I think that's kind of what Mr. Beers is getting at. Is you can kind of expect the same kind of crap to come out of the mouth of hipsters, out of millennials, because they don't have that real life experience to go from. I think that was kind of the point Mr. Beers was trying to make.
It's also, in terms of its tone, it works on another level because it's also kind of lacking in character and kind of monotonous, kind of one note. Doesn't really deviate much. Like some tard hitting the same key on a piano over and over.
Or someone just blowing a bagpipe full and just and then just nothing else. I think that was what I don't think that Caleb was meaning too much more, other than using that as a metaphor for what it is. I mean, I don't think that the word hipster drone, you're not going to go find that anywhere in the lexicon as a phrase per se. That's something that Mr. Beers was putting together all by himself in an attempt to use language as a teaching tool. And so, he kind of left it up partially to our imaginations to figure out what it is that he meant, but then he also gave a pretty good exposition of what it is that he meant. Now, if you don't think that that's droning on, well, then that could be another completely different thing, and we could have a talk about that. But, just yeah, I think that's what he meant. Is that a little more clear now?
I'll be right back. I'm going to mute my mic. I'll be right back.
Okay. A person who thinks he's unique, but is really the same drone as everyone else. Mr. Thorbjornson, I have a question for you. Did you go to sleep, or did you and get up, or did you just never go to sleep? Have some lovely apple cider, water, and coffee. Not mixing them all together, but drinking them separately, and that is really nice for the morning. Anyhow, I think that another thing that Mr. Beers, not necessarily explicitly stated, but it was definitely it comes from the same general point as what he was saying before. All right, hopefully, Mr. Beers, can we hear you? Can we hear you?
Can you hear me?
Yes! Good.
Hello!
All right, so I think that that the piece that Mr. Beers wanted to read is an example of a larger phenomenon. I think it's an example of something a lot bigger. There are certain ways of using language. There are certain rhetorical elements. And there are certain things that, especially, say, 200 years ago, people would have been able to, or would have been expected to have been able to abstract. There are certain levels of subtlety, there are certain levels of nuance, there are certain shades of meaning that different words indicate. Drone, for example, has a particular meaning, but then when put into a different context, you kind of have to understand the meaning of the word in the context, and then spend some time cogitating what's actually going on. And if you don't know what cogitating is, you can look that up in the dictionary. The early 1800s was an age where, at least in the United States, and almost exclusively in the United States, literacy was nearly ubiquitous. That's another word to look up if you don't know what it means. Although I can give you a thing that says that, a biological reference, that if something is ubiquitous, it is found in every single cell. So take that for what it's worth. there are these skills, literacy, for example, that were assumed to be ubiquitous. And literacy meant, 200 years ago, literacy meant basically you know as much as a graduate student in English knows today. Maybe even more. Actually, quite likely, way more. I'm talking somebody who is defending a PhD in English. And you were expected to basically be that familiar with stuff as a fifth grader. There were certain cultural and societal expectations that you know language, that you understand nuance. And over the course of time, the societal expectations have gone down and down and down and down to the point where literacy is generally defined as a fourth or fifth grade reading level today. Which means what? Can finish a Hardy Boys book with minimal problems? Can finish Nancy Drew? Can read an article in the New York Times? Oh, sorry. Sorry. Did I say that aloud? Okay, so the general level of writing has gone down and down and down, as the general level of education. Really blame everyone for it. You can't blame millennials for having for having a bad educational paradigm and having been injected into it. But what you can do is blame people that have spent a great portion of their adult lives in the real world and still don't have it. That they don't see the need for, that they've somehow been able to isolate themselves from the real world enough to not actually have this this reality check. Like when I was little, and I'm talking little, if I didn't know a word, my dad never told me what the word meant. My dad was an immigrant too. My dad was an immigrant. He came from Finland to the United States, and he came as an exchange student because he was failing English. That is the only reason he went to the United States. If he wasn't failing English, he would not have gone. But in every other subject, he was great. But he was failing English. He did not watch TV. He did not watch many movies. He didn't do that kind of a thing. He was too busy sailing and programming computers and doing things like that. So my dad came, learned English. He made a deal with his English teacher here in Finland that if you give me a passing grade, or if you give me an A, essentially, I will spend next year and I will go as an exchange student so that I don't fail out of this high school. Teacher acquiesced to the deal. My dad went, and that's where he met my mom, and he went and he learned English. He wound up having all sorts of conversations with people in English and managing to learn the language. When I was little, my dad's vocabulary surpassed that of almost anyone that I know. And it was interesting because he had this weird hybrid Ohio-Finland accent thing going on, and he didn't sound sophisticated whatsoever, but his vocabulary and his understanding were on point all the time. But if ever he used a word, and he would use words in conversation with me all the time that I didn't know, and if I were to ask him, what's that word mean? His answer would be, well, look it up. He had a couple sayings that he went to. There are these things called books. Read them. That was one thing my dad told me. And these are things called dictionaries. Use them. You have a brain. Use it. So basically, he didn't let me use him as a crutch. He insisted that I go and I learn these things for myself. Now, certainly one element of learning things can be learning practical knowledge from another human being. But another element of learning is being able to crack open a book or a dictionary, a thesaurus, or whatever, and then use it. So that's something that millennials haven't really learned to do. And especially Generation Z. I would actually say Generation Z is probably in a better position than millennials because they spent their teens, at least some of them spent their teens cognizant of what a crap hole the West has become compared to what it could have been under a different philosophical, or in a different philosophical context. But basically, um, but basically, there are these meta skills, there are these life skills like learning how to learn, learning how to communicate, all these different things that are important to get. And if millennials would get these skills, they would be able to come across as considerably more intelligent. They would have more dynamic as opposed to monotony. They wouldn't be droning on. They would have rich dynamic lives, and that would reflect in their writing, in their communication, in their interactions with other people. That would all be kind of put together. But as things currently stand, people don't have that background anymore. And that is one of the many things that on this particular channel I'm seeking to solve. One of the big things I've been looking to do is give a real classical education. Like none of this liberal arts BS that you get from mainstream universities today, but give an actual liberal arts education as people would have gotten a century ago, or probably 2 centuries ago, and supplement it heavily. Overemphasize the classics, overemphasize things that are, and I'm going to jump out on a limb here and say objectively better than the new stuff. Not all new stuff is bad, but the old stuff exists for a reason. The old stuff has stood the test of time for a reason. Doing things the old way works because if we think that up to about 200 years ago, people were living predominantly hand to mouth. So if they were to go and get an education, it would have to be in important things. It would have to be in things that would allow them to either live longer, be healthier, propagate their genetic material on better, take care of their children better, ensure the survival of their progeny, and so on. Because ultimately, if you don't propagate ideas and your genetic material in this world, you are not accomplishing anything. If you don't generate a proper context for this to take place, you are being worthless. And insofar as this world goes. And so everything in an education that has stood the test of time is conducive to that end. Everything that has stood the test of time actually helps people. If it didn't, it would have gotten selected out over the years. But now that things are going so very well for us as a society, now that things are so good, we don't have to worry about whether a philosophy is good or bad in the short term, because it's not going to have immediate implications in our lives. It's not going to, having a bad philosophy isn't immediately going to cause our lives to go to crap so badly that we need to change. We can hold on to bad ideas for much longer than people could afford to in the past. And so we can afford to be less picky when it comes to what it is we fill our minds with. Well, I'm suggesting that we still work on filling our minds with good things. And that is why, beginning next week, beginning next Monday, I'm just going to start doing a little bit of an analysis on the Iliad. The Iliad and the Odyssey are going to be the first 2 things that we go through. And why are we going to go through those specifically? They're Homer's works, but they're essentially compilations of oral tradition. And what happens when you pass things on from father to son, and so on, or from mother to daughter, and so on, is the stories get distilled down to their essential elements. Over many generations, if you pass on a story, only that which matters will remain. And that means there's something to be learned from all of these if you go and analyze them at a little bit deeper level. If you think of like one book of the Iliad as a few nights worth of bedtime stories for a kid that mom and dad could talk about the next day and be like, okay, well, what can we learn about Hector? What can we learn about Agamemnon? What can we learn from what it is that Achilles did? And and talk about it from that particular standpoint. Conversely, the Bible has been around for so long. Well, what can we learn from King David in that incident with Bathsheba? What can we learn about Joseph and Potiphar's wife? What can we learn about the fact that the only good person around in a society and in an entire generation got nailed to a tree? What can we learn about all these elements? And then just have an open and honest conversation about the matter. It causes us to actually think. We don't. We actually have to interact with the material. We have to synthesize things. We have to actually use our faculty of reason, as opposed to simply going and being like, okay, I'm in school, they tell me learn ABC, I ABC, and that's it. And so the entire human condition was different because it necessitated people to be thinkers and doers, as opposed to mere talkers and circle jerkers. And I think that is the ultimate underpinning of what Mr. Beers was getting at in his answer, and ultimately shows us the light of a potential solution that we can implement in our current generation if we decide that we're going to pay attention to that which matters.
I would say that what we can do about indoctrination in colleges and universities is we can still have colleges and universities, but what we need is to cut the government funding to those institutions.
Exactly. And going off of the chat, and I haven't seen it for too long, but yes, there are misguided individuals on the alt-right, and no, the government doesn't need to be funding education. In fact, I would say that probably the alt-right is full of reactionary people. The alt-right is full of people that perhaps realize there's something wrong, and just as people on the far left resort to extremist ideologies, the people on the right do. It's almost like, okay, we see what's wrong, or we feel that there's something wrong, and so we're just going to react in some way. But the reaction isn't predicated on what actually works. It's just a reaction, and it's very uneducated, it's very ill-informed. And so, as the proverb goes, my people perish for lack of knowledge, both on the alt-right and on the left. Now, of course, people are now throwing the alt-right moniker out. People are just throwing it and trying to throw that crap at everyone that says something that disagrees with the points of the left, which is completely wrong. But if you're there burning crosses and saying kill black people and things of that nature, well, I take issue with you personally. I think you're a morally reprehensible, useless piece of shit, and need to get your act cleaned up. But by and large, I think that if you're on the alt-right, you don't actually believe that. And I am going to go out of my way, and I'm sure Mr. Beers has been, and will continue to go out of his way to provide perhaps a more classical, a different, a more healthy paradigm for existing.
Jordan Peterson actually tweeted out one of my YouTube videos, which you can find on my channel, which is linked in the description to this video. And Stephen, please don't feel repelled at all. You're welcome to subscribe to both of our channels and show up to future streams.
Or if you don't like us, you're welcome to not subscribe to any of our stuff and don't show up to any future streams. But the fact of the matter is, at least insofar as I'm concerned, you're always welcome. Everyone's welcome, and yeah, we'll probably be. I mean, the reason that we call this Calling Sacred Cows, the reason my stream is called that is because sacred cows in the Hindu religion, or cows in the Hindu religion are sacred, and I like beef, right? Lots of people like beef. And so the idea that you can go and kill what somebody else considers sacred in order to satisfy your own dietary requirements or dietary wishes, just because there's nothing inherently sacred about a cow, unless of course you're Hindu and you think that there are, just going and systematically going, okay, that goes, that goes, that goes, that goes, yeah, that might be difficult. It might be a hard to swallow pill. But I think that if we are all willing to have our sacred cows called, and that includes Mr. Beers, that includes me, that includes any other guests that we have on our show, that we would be more open-minded, and that we would be more ready to consider all sorts of other things that might be good for us. And so I would just encourage that no matter whose stream you attend or whose stream you don't attend or whatever it is that you are deciding to associate with, that you would keep an open mind and be willing to both dish it out and take it. Like if you can dish out criticism, you take the criticism. Like working on a level playing field and bouncing ideas off of each other is quite a productive thing. And if we can ultimately meet each other where each of us are at and both be willing to grow, I think that all of our streams and all of our interactions, both on an interpersonal level and on a face-to-face level and within society, can be an awful lot better. Mr. Beers, would you like to take Mr. Montoya's next question?
Certainly.
Oh
Do
no,
people
would you please
generally have a hard
restart your
time thinking for
Discord?
themselves? What did you say?
Can both of us restart our, or kill out of this call and go to the next and start a new call?
Yes. Me?
Oh no.
You can't hear me. Son of a
Oh boy.
bitch. Hang on.
Alright, I cannot see you and I cannot hear you.
How about now?
Perhaps this also has to do with me being in the middle of nowhere.
It may. Here, I think I'm...
Alright, Mr. Beers says that he'll bow out of this conversation just due to the fact that there's technical difficulties associated therewith. But I would really hope that that he would answer his opinion in the chat box. Yeah, I do think that people generally have a hard time thinking for themselves. And the reasons, I think, are very complex. They're simple, but definitely not simplistic. Mr. Beers has graciously decided to answer your question about having a hard time thinking for themselves in chat. But in the meantime, I'll talk about it a bit. And I would say it's because when people were living hand to mouth, when life was harder, they had to think for themselves. But the more our life got parsed into little bits and we realized, okay, I can just be a small cog in a machine, well, that if I decide I'm going to be a small cog in a machine, it's very easy for me to shut my mind off. And there's a physiological explanation. We use a lot of glucose. Could be, very well could be subliminal messaging. And I think that matches with our physiology. If we have somebody saying, "Don't worry, we'll do your thinking for you. Don't worry, we'll take care of things for you," it's easy. It's easy to think, okay, I'll just let somebody else do my thinking for me. But ultimately, that's my problem if I do it. But it's explained due to the fact that the brain uses a great amount of glucose, and we, being what we are as human beings, like to conserve resources. So we use heuristics. Is it popular, for instance, is one heuristic. Has it been shown to work in other people's lives? Therefore, is it popular? That's one. Does it rhyme? That's another one. There are all sorts of different ones that ultimately short circuit our brain's capacity to think. And can make actually understanding things more difficult. Now, if we see, we have a choice in the matter. We really do have a choice in the matter. And ultimately, I think that as adults, the responsibility falls on us to learn and to grow and to make decisions. The Japanese have this method called kaizen, which essentially means, or the basic premise behind this idea is marginal improvement every day. If you can get 1% better at something every day, 1% better at thinking for yourself, 1% better at whatever, just don't worry about the end result, but focus so much on improving, focus so much on getting the process better, that at the end of a year, you will not have improved 100%, because the growth is exponential. You'll get better. But yeah, the default state is if we as children never had to think, if we as children always had the decisions made for us, and we were never given the opportunity to become independent, if we were never forced by our parents or by our teachers or whatever to come to independent conclusions, That would be horrible for us. In fact, I would say the most abusive thing a parent can do, aside from, beating their children or something like that, one of the biggest abuses, and many parents are guilty of doing this, is divorcing action from consequence. Now, this may seem like a very small thing, but I believe it's huge. Because if Timmy does something, whatever that something may be, whether if it's something good that would lead to good results or something bad that would lead to bad results, how does Timmy learn that something's good or bad? Timmy learns because action leads to consequence. Action leads to consequence. And if you're constantly shielding people from the consequences of their actions, like in school, for example, grade inflation is one example. If you don't study, if you don't learn, you still get a good grade because ultimately we can't fail anybody. Well, that's bad. You act like a horrible human being, but the zero tolerance policy means that somebody can't go and beat your face in at school. Well, you don't learn not to be a horrible human being. There are natural consequences for things that if you get rid of them, people will never learn. Well, if there are never consequences for not thinking, if there's always somebody else to pick up the pieces, as opposed to you being responsible for you being responsible for yourself, if you always have somebody else that you can point the finger to and say the blame is on him, if you always have somebody you can point the finger to and say this person will clean up my mess, then I never have any incentive to improve myself, and you don't have an incentive to improve yourself. Nobody does. So, the key is to lead a life of significance, and especially don't shield your children from the consequences of their actions, good or bad. I think the predominant blame lies with parents. The secondary blame lies with people not knowing how to function in good times and still stay strong. And the tertiary blame lies with society in itself, in that people generally tend toward herd behavior, and then if there's somebody a little bit louder than the rest, somebody a little bit more vocal, somebody that goes and steps into the position of authority and says, I have all the answers, even though the secret is they don't. They don't. They're just stupid enough to think that they do, or they're power hungry enough to want to do it. And we listen to them. Well, that's the problem. But ultimately, like you don't need to be subliminally reinforced not to think. That'll be the natural default state of people unless thinking is required to actually get what they want. Now, maybe there could be subliminally the idea that, okay, you need to be a small cog in a big machine. And that comes from the industrial era education, as Caleb so wisely pointed out. The idea that we play just one small part, and that one small part is very clearly defined for us, and we don't think outside the walls of that little box that we fit in. Well, that is a product of industrial era education, and that's something that if you are working on a farm, for example, you can't limit yourself that way, because you have to solve the problem. You are responsible. If you're an entrepreneur, you can't think that way. Whether you're an expert in the field or not, you have to solve the problem. And so that forces you, by having big goals, by having to do things, and even if the big goal is simply survive, you will. You have this. And if you need it, your resources will go to improving your situation. So, think. And if it's difficult for you, well then put yourself in a situation where you're forced to. Because I guarantee you will. It's more risky. Certainly there's more risk involved. As soon as you have to think for yourself, you have to take responsibility for your own actions. But also, with that increased amount of thinking comes an increased amount of reward for doing things right. And with all the mistakes that we all inevitably make, and here's another secret for you, we all make many, many mistakes. The most successful people are that way because they fail more than most people dare even fail. But all it takes is one or two successes in the course of a lifetime in order to set you up for that perpetual success. So don't be afraid to fail. And that is perhaps another message that we get in school with our grades, is that you can fail. The school doesn't teach you never fail until you stop trying. It's you if you get anything less than a certain grade or whatever, that it's bad. That it somehow poorly reflects on you as a person. Maybe it did. Maybe it meant that you studied badly, or maybe it just meant that you were tired. So going and associating your permanent sense of worth with a grade, as opposed to understanding that as a temporary indicator and always trying to aim for self-improvement, is a huge difference. There's a huge difference in between those two tags. One of those will lead to success. That of being willing to fail, succeed. As opposed to fail, become defeated, lose your serotonin, and somehow let that lead into a spiraling downward path that involves you, I don't know, jerking off to porn and eating Cheetos in your parents' basement when you're 40 years old, while not even being able to flip hamburgers for the rest of your life because hamburger flipping is now automated. And all of that is ultimately predicated upon our understanding of failure and our understanding of ourselves. And if we would have a classical education, if we would simply do something like read the Odyssey, read the Bible, we would understand that failure is only temporary. Odysseus failed many times. Achilles and Agamemnon were flawed people that made stupid, emotionally based decisions. The stories that we tell reflect the fact that in spite of all these different things, we can still come out the other end being somewhat successful. Of course, the story of Achilles was a tragedy, but then again, it was designed to be that way. The story of Odysseus was he got back home. He got back home. And ultimately, that persistence, that willingness to proceed forward in spite of being met with failure at every step, is what will get us to our goal. Now I'll go and after having this little rant, we'll take a look at the chat. Oh boy. Oh, now we're talking about, oh boy. Yeah, secret people going and running things. Yeah. Yeah. As Caleb said, is all decentralized and ideological. The ideology in itself is contagious. But the fact of the matter is, we human beings are great at grabbing onto a stupid idea and perpetuating it. This is interesting. So Goth Boy Click and Narwhal Squad, welcome to the stream. What's going on? You hope my parents burn in a house fire or Caleb's? Whose parents are you talking about? Or Ales maybe, or Yulvis? Thanks, Caleb. Yeah, that's interesting. Boy. You know, I'm assuming, perhaps I'm wrong here, but I'm assuming that that's just what happens when people go and search for, like, you're more than welcome to come here and behave respectfully and ask questions and give opinions and so on, but, you know, I hope your parents die in a house fire. No, I don't hope anybody's parents die in a house fire. Doesn't make any sense at all. What's up with that? I mean, that's just, I don't know if it's hate or if it's trolling, but you know, that kind of thing is pretty uncalled for. I don't know if you have to worry about Caleb ever banning you. I, on the other hand, no. No. Yeah. Well, this is nice. And this stream also went rather quickly. So I'm going to ask Mr. Beers, do you have any ideas? Of course you have ideas. That's a very, very dumb way to ask the question. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Alles on to me. I'm adopting new body language. Aww. Well, anyhow, you'll get some love. Anyhow, and even so, maybe after the stream, yeah, we could also have a chat. Yeah. What? Caleb, Stephen, Ale, Yulvet. I'm going to go and, shall we say, relieve myself. I'm going to relieve myself, and in said process, we'll just say we'll take a 4-minute break or something like that. Intermission to stream will resume in 4 minutes. And in the meantime, you guys can talk about what it is that we're going to talk about for the remainder of the time. Because I'm actually feeling up to making this a 3-hour stream. I think this will be quite fun. Anyhow, guys, we will, at least I hope to, see you on the other side.